JonathanKing25. Now, I was telling you about how I was running Decca Records for my friend Sir Edward Lewis, and I told you the story about how I went to Los Angeles, met Phil Spector and all that, and there were lots of great times. This was around 1969, I suppose, by now. And as I said, I was very close to Sir Edward, and I was basically running the entire huge £80 million company globally, as it then was. And of course, one of the big problems we had was a relationship with the Rolling Stones, because Sir Edward and Bill Townsley and all the people running Decca were in their 60s, 70s or even 80s. And the Rolling Stones were the young, vibrant band, and all in their 20s, as was I, and they just really weren't communicating. And worse than that, Mick Jagger had gone and got themselves a new lawyer, Alan Klein, the much dreaded Alan Klein, who I have to say I always got on very well with. So it was rather useful that I was sort of in the middle, because I could negotiate between the two. The Stones basically wanted to leave Decca and get a huge deal. That's what American lawyers do for you when you finally break. And of course Decca wanted to retain them. Anyway, I think the last record they had out was in May 1968, which was Jumping Jack Flash. And it had got to the middle of 1969, and I thought, you know what, the Rolling Stones are actually beginning to fade away from people's memories. Not fade away. That was a clever link. I didn't think of that. So I called for Mick Jagger and I said, come in and have a meeting. Now, Mick Jagger, I have to tell you, is the most together businessman I have ever met. He used to, of course, I don't think it's any secret, do all the drugs in the 60s, and he's an example of somebody I've often quoted as somebody who uses drugs but doesn't let drugs use them. And that's always the main problem, not just with drugs but with alcohol, sex, everything. If it runs you, you're in trouble. If you run it, you're okay. And Mick was always well in control, and whenever he came in for a meeting, it was as bright as a button. I'd put ideas to him, he'd go yes to that, no to that. He was right on top of it all. I had huge respect for him, a nice man, an intelligent, decent man, and a hell of a businessman. So I said to him, look, I have to tell you, Mick, the Rolling Stones are beginning to fade out of people's memories, and you do need another single release for both of our sakes. If we keep on with you as Decca, we don't want you to drift down. If, on the other hand, you move to somewhere else, it can only do good to have had a big hit record. So Mick said, well, OK, Jonathan, I'll tell you what, I will make another record, but only if you guarantee me you will put it at #1. Now, those days, it was not an easy guarantee to make. These days, of course, with the chart hype and everything, anybody can do anything. But in those days, you actually really had to have a record that would sell. And I said, oh, yes, Mick, no problem. I guarantee you it's a #1. Thinking, oh, my God, how do I do that? And off he went. Couple of weeks later, I get into my office early one morning, and Mick has been in late at night and left a tape on my desk and said, well, I've done more than give you one #1, I've given you two #1s, now you've got to go and make them both #1. So I rather nervously put the tape on. It was a reel-to-reel player, and it was Honky Tonk Women. And I thought, no problem, I'll get that to #1 without even having to think about it. Then I put on the second track, You Can't Always Get What You Want. And I thought, oh my God, unbelievable. Anyway, I did get them both to #1. Mick was very happy. The Rolling Stones did, unfortunately, eventually leave Decca for a much bigger deal. But they're great records, I think. Some of the great ones are later ones, like Start Me Up and some of those other brilliant ones. But their first records were probably the best ones, for me, they ever made. It was wonderful, Decca, in the late 70s, and I was having a fantastic time. In the late 60s. I did actually return in the late 70s to run it again for Sir Edward, but that's another episode and another adventure. Meanwhile, however, I was going about life as usual, doing all the things I do, and I still do them, mainly irritating people like mad, driving everyone from celebrities to normal people, especially the media, out of their mind. I enjoyed doing it, and I've always enjoyed doing it. I like getting up people's noses. The main reason being, if somebody doesn't know me personally, I don't care if they don't like me or even hate me, because I think that you're brain dead if you judge somebody without actually getting to know them. So I've always sort of pushed the envelope of irritation and managed to get people more and more and more annoyed. And I found that great fun. I did all the way through my early career, and I'm still doing it today. But the time had come when being a DJ, which was also fun, and running Decca and being an irritation really wasn't enough because it wasn't making me any money. So I decided I had to make a record. As I told you in the last episode, I then made and released Let It All Hang Out, which I'm glad to say turned into a big hit record and was even more irritating to people than before. But I decided I had to do something to actually make sure that people knew that I was coming up with a record. So I retired. On my 25th birthday, which was December the 6th, 1969, I actually issued an announcement that I was retiring from being an artist and I was releasing one last record. All bollocks, of course, all guaranteed to get me lots of publicity. And I said I was going to be working only entirely behind the scenes. I would be running record companies and things now on. I was not going to be an artist anymore. So Here For You was my last recording. And out came Let It All Hang Out, and on the back of all the publicity, it turned into a huge hit, and is a huge hit selling still today in 2006, many years later.